So, what I'd like to talk about is painting. Okay, so digital painting, which is something I don't really do enough of. I have, the background chops built in traditional watercolor, new pastel, oil paint, acrylic, the things that everyone uses in art school and so forth. And that's my training, that's my grounding. And I refused to touch digital for years and years and years. I thought it was cheating in some way. I didn't really understand or recognize or appreciate it. And I thought that a lot of the work that I was seeing was very similar. Now there's as many ways of working and as many artists working digitally in incredibly innovative and interesting ways as there are, perfectly polished academicians who are great draftsmen but really boring painters, let's say. So, preamble aside. So there are a few different ways that I like to work digitally and paint digitally in terms of how I start, right? So the first way is the one that I learned really in the Illustration Academy, way back yonder, from Mark English and John English and Brent Watkinson and George Pratt and all the amazing guys and gals that teach there, where you're drawing basically on a mid-toned ground paper with a light and a dark stick of new pastel. And you are whacking in the great big shapes. You're not drawing in line, you're thinking in terms of shape, silhouette, and edge, right? Soft and hard edges. And you can do a lot. You can sneak up sort of on a composition working that way, purely in shape, and that's very fun. So I'll do that a lot of times with painting, where I'm just sort of whacking in big shapes. I'm not really thinking in terms of refined line work or really crispy edges or anything like that. I'm just thinking big shapes. What is the big statement? So that's great, especially for thumbnails, right? Where you're thinking about the entirety of the piece in its totality, not necessarily piecemeal. The other way I like to work is very much a drawing approach, sort of a scribbling approach. This is another thing I probably picked up from George. In fact, I'm sure that I picked it up from George Pratt. Scribbling, right? So digitally, this gets easy because you can make corrections very easily, but you can make corrections very easily as well if you're doing this in oil, thinned oil on a canvas or a board or anything like that. So I will think on paper, on the screen as it may be, and scribble in my drawing. So, working in that kind of way, if you looked at Heinrich Kley's work, you can sort of have a visual representation of what I'm speaking about. I am sort of building form out just with line work, thinking and feeling through form with line and scribbling it into place and building form that way. And that's great because if I don't necessarily have amazing reference, what this lets me do is, feel out form, feel out whatever perspective I might be introducing into a piece, make corrections, keep things very energetic and loose, and then sneak up on the other aspects of the painting like color, right? So I don't really consider color when I am starting a piece. Color is really more of my third concern. So first would be composition. What does everything look like in the abstract? If I zoom out and I flip it to black and white and I'm looking at just the big concrete abstract shapes, are they interesting? Not everything that I do is compositionally focused either, so I fall down on that a lot. Someone like Gary Kelly, right, up over my shoulder. Composition is king for him, and it's really the most important thing about a painting, any piece, because it's sort of the first thing that hits you, right? It gets behind your eyeballs and into your gut before you're able to process any kind of line work or story or anything like that. You're seeing an assemblage of big, simple shapes in terms of value. So composition is first, really. The drawing is second, because you can get away with murder in your drawing if your composition is interesting enough. You can manipulate a lot of things. You can exaggerate, you can distort, you can emphasize, you can minimize, you can invent. You can do a lot with your drawing if your composition is interesting. And then third is color. So color is not always my primary concern. I kind of sneak up on it as I work through a piece. And it's really the last thing that I'm paying attention to. I kind of bring all the color together at the end of the painting. This is especially true with digital, where a lot of times I'm working in pretty much pure black and white up until I start to go and glaze and whack in color and sneak color into that drawing. So I'm not a brilliant colorist. I think really in terms of tone, okay? And again, in terms of composition and the drawing. So the color that I use when I'm painting, I'm actually shooting for verisimilitude. If I'm just laying color on a drawing, as in a fashion illustration or something along those lines, I'm very arbitrary, right? Because it's my picture. A person can be blue, I don't care. But with a painting, I try and keep things fairly real. I try and introduce verisimilitude into painting. I just feel that for me and for the way that I treat painting, I like it to have that smack of truth, right? If I want pure exaggeration, I'll go I'll draw. But if I want to, flesh out an idea and give it form and paint the air that exists in that piece, to quote George Pratt, who was quoting Jeff Jones, you're painting the air between yourself and the object. You're not really painting the thing, you're painting the atmosphere. Think on that. That might not make sense right away, but think on it. It's a really interesting thought. So that's what I'm doing. And my color references as an artist, they kind of span the gamut. I love tonalists. Okay, so guys like George Inness, great American landscape painter. Obviously, who else do I have down here? Whistler, right? James Abbott McNeill Whistler, the great. Tremendous influence on my color. I know he was a big influence on George. So a lot of my influences are second, third, fourth, and fifth hand. It's who are the people that I admire looking at, and what did they do in their own work with that information that I then absorbed and reinterpreted and made my own, right? Baltus is another painter whose color sense I really admire. I don't really paint in that palette, but I love that work. And then that's really it. Sometimes I'll reference other people's paintings for a palette. A lot of times I'm just kind of making things up and sort of going by feel. So it's a very intuitive process. Now, to my advantage and to my detriment, I'm not a very methodical painter or draftsman. I'm pretty intuitive through the whole process. Again, this is sort of how I was trained, right? This is the influence of my mentors. Now, the academy, those guys at the academy who are teaching you illustration, how to create an illustration, how to create commercial art, you need to have a very particular sort of locked-in conception before you jump into the finish, because you've got to present roughs to an art director. They've got to know where you're going to go before you go and create a final piece. But for the work that you do for yourself, which is most of what I do, I mean, a lot of things that you're going to see on my feed or something, they're personal projects, right? I'm not bound by what someone's brief says. I don't have to get anything approved, which means that I'm free to just dive in and approach things the way that I like, for better or for worse. Process and limitation a lot of times can produce very interesting work because you're forced to consider boundaries and parameters. When you've got unlimited choice, a lot of times you can dither around and experiment with 20 different directions without committing to something. But I don't let myself do that. My digital work, I keep the same sort of philosophy that I do with my ink work, which is one and done. Put it down, live with it, adjust if need be, but roll with the punches. You don't have to approach something from 20 different angles, despite the fact that there might be a better approach in there. But my thought is that, well, I can always just make another painting. I can always make another drawing. I don't want to polish a turd. I'd rather just go hard and go fast, see if something works. If I continue to get a charge from it, and it's compelling to me to work on, then I'll stick with it. But if I lose all interest, then I'll drop it and I'll start something different. So that energy is very important for me. What do I mean by that? I mean that I need to get some kind of a charge off of the subject that I'm illustrating. And I think that the best work that I've done, it's very obvious to me, and I think, if I look at other artists' work, I can tell what they're interested in, right? You can sort of see what someone's enthusiasms and their favorite subjects and their peccadillos and their stylistic influences. You can get all of that at a glance, and you can tell when they're making inspired work, and you can tell when they're just kind of cranking something out. A lot of stuff I'm just cranking out. It's not particularly inspired. But the stuff that I'm inspired by, there tends to be an initial conception. There might be an initial thumbnail or two, or 3, or 4, or 5. But I've got an idea that grips me, right, that I really want to express. And I work through that idea in a pretty intuitive way. Again, so I might have a thumbnail, or 2, or 3, or 4. I might have a list of words. This is something that Sterling Hundley teaches at the Academy that I picked up probably from him. Just to list words, like what are the concepts, what are the phrases that come up when you're considering this subject, and I'll hone in on something, and I'll run with that, right? So I know if I got something and I'm like, ooh, sends a frisson of excitement up and down my spine, then I'm like, okay, let me jump on this one, because I know that it's going to produce the enthusiasm required to see it through to the end. If I get no enthusiasm from the subject or from the phrase or from the thumbnail or the idea, then it's not going to, why would I bother, right? If I'm going to spend 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 24, I don't know, hours on a piece, I want to know that I'm going to enjoy the process, even when it gets sticky. This is what I mean when I say that a lot of my process is it's very intuitive. I'm not thinking too hard. This is why having your chops sort of honed in is important, because it gives you the ability to freely express something, to express an idea, and to have the confidence to carry it out. So even if I don't have a strict A to Z plan in place as to how I'm going to execute, I know basically, okay, if I have to do A, B, C, D, and E, F, and G, and then I'll keep stepping until I get to Z, and then I'll have a finished piece. So that's where having chops, like your fundamentals handled, helps you with accessing that intuitive side of working. So learn your stuff, and then you unlock next levels of creativity, essentially, which is the same in any craft, right? Someone that's got it down, they can spitball, they can freestyle. A jazz musician, they're an incredible musician, okay? So, John Coltrane, incredible musician. When he goes off on a solo, it's because he knows what he's doing. He knows what rules he's breaking. He's able to follow sort of the dictates of the moment, right? Miles Davis was doing incredible things on a trumpet, improvising, stretching the limits of the instrument, because he knew how to coax that from the instrument by being so thoroughly classically trained in music. It's the same with art, right? Most artists that are wildly expressive, a lot of them started from a pretty, solid foundation, okay? So then they're layering their own taste and their own interests on top of this super solid base. So, as far as my painting process is concerned, I work pretty fast. I like to bang it out, man. I don't want to sit on this piece forever and ever. If it's interesting to me, and if the goal is for me to create something that's very polished, then I'll do that, sure. But you can get away with a lot in terms of treatment and how rough you go with something, which is something that I learned from Harvey Dunn and, N.C. Wyeth, Howard Pyle, Frank Schoonover, Dean Cornwell, all these amazing illustrators of the latter 19th and, early to mid-20th century. These guys would get away with murder. Maybe not Dean Cornwell, he was pretty exacting, but Dunn especially, okay, or Wyeth. They'd be very loose with their brushwork in certain places, and then they would tighten up on a point of interest. You can treat things very broadly, but you've got to hone in. You got to pick your point of focus, pick your point of emphasis. Pick the thing that you want folks to really pay attention to. Okay, this is an interesting example behind me, this Gary Kelly piece. So I'm going to use this just because it's here. So this poster, let me get up closer. Its primary purpose, if I were to guess what Gary's intentions were, was to be decorative, right? To explore color, to explore composition, to explore form, to have some fun, to maybe play with some historical references, maybe some fun photography that he had and wanted to interpret. But I would not, it's not narrative based. There's really not a singular point to the piece. Like if there's any point, it's the fruit that she's carrying on top of her head. But it's not like there's a human expression that we're supposed to look at. We're not gazing at the detail of the architecture. We're not gazing at anything here to try and find realism or drama or anything like that. It's a decorative abstract. It's a decorative abstract. So you have to know what the point of the piece is that you're making. Are you looking to create just a pleasing assemblage of colors and shapes? Great. Abstract art can be beautiful, right? That's great abstract art with a figurative focus. So, but it's not a narrative painting, really, insofar there's not really a story. There's not a point of drama that we're being drawn into. It's just, it's an abstract. It's practically an abstract. So know the point that you're trying to make, right? So if I've got a samurai piece that I'm creating, for instance, the point is to convey the energy of the phrase that I started the piece with, okay? So tremendous action, what does that look like? And then I'm trying to bring that into the way that I execute the work. Active meditation. That was another samurai piece that I did. What is active meditation? Well, I thought, well, what is active meditation for me? It's drawing and it's painting, right? So we have a samurai engaged with a brush and a paint. And that was really more compositionally focused and maybe a bit of color, but it's not really a dramatic piece. The battle scenes and so forth. Again, I'm trying to muster a feeling, a sensation, energy. I'm trying to take energy from a phrase and channel it into a composition. So know what the point of the piece that you're making is. Whether it's you want to give someone an emotion, you want to show off a really cool piece of, I don't know, costume or something like that. Maybe you've got a character whose personality you're trying to convey. Maybe it's a moment in a story. Maybe you're trying to create a mood, right? So a mood piece doesn't necessarily have to have a story. You're letting someone sort of fill in the blanks, and you're conveying an emotional tone with color, with pose, with costume, with setting, and so forth, and composition. So know the point of the piece that you're trying to make, and understand what approach is going to help you achieve that, right? So a landscape, I'm probably not going to draw a landscape out. I'm going to start whacking in big shapes because it's going to be more expressive, more interesting. People don't really hold trees to the same standard of realism as they might a human face. So whereas a multi-figure composition, I might draw that out first. I might draw my way to that composition because there's anatomy that I want to convey. There's form that I want to give weight to. There is action that might be occurring. There's costume that I might want to represent. So I'm thinking in terms of line, draftsmanship, how to best convey the end desired image. So start with that kind of thought in mind. What is the sensation? What is the feeling? What is the mood? What is the emotion I'm trying to carry forward? And then how do I use composition, drawing, and color to help me achieve that aim? So those are my thoughts for the day. Take care, make art, have fun. See you soon.